Hello, I'm Mark Tucker.
And I'm Alan Furstenberg. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, Alan.
Hey, Mark. How's it been going?
It is, it's going busy. Things have been kind of a little different. But colder weather, and
I don't want to talk about colder weather. I really don't. But then again, when you say colder weather, you're talking 60 Fahrenheit, 50 Fahrenheit?
it's been a little chilly this week. We've had lows in the low 30s
Ooh,
in Arizona. I know.
that is chilly for you.
It is been a little chilly and a little bit windy today. I was just kind of like, wow, this
I
is.
I noticed though you are still wearing short sleeves.
Yes, I'm inside. So yeah.
So, the past couple of weeks we've been talking about different chatbot technologies,
Yeah.
and one of the things that we kind of put off from last time when we talked about Google's Chat API was talking about Dialogflow, and I'm wondering if we want to kind of pick that up and chat about it a little bit this week. What do you think?
I think we should have a dialogue, see how it flows.
So, oh boy, I promise the rest of the conversation won't be this punny.
All right, we got it out of our system. Oh, shake it
I don't
off.
know. I don't know about that, but um, as we kind of started talking about last week, Dialogflow's an interesting product. Google originally bought it kind of intentionally to bundle it with the Google Assistant,
Mhm.
but it was already a product that was out there, and it had customers, so they needed to find a home for it, and they put it in Google Cloud when they renamed it Dialogflow. So there were a bunch of customers that were using it for natural language processing, and that's really what its purpose was at the time.
Right.
Um, and since then, in typical Google fashion, there are now two versions of it, which are completely incompatible from each other, yet have the same name. Google Assistant kind of jettisoned it, but didn't jettison it, and created something called Action Builder, which
Yep.
bears a striking similarity to Dialogflow, but is completely incompatible with it. And Action Builder is getting thrown out when Google Assistant is going away, but Dialogflow is living on in Google Cloud.
Wow.
So
So Dialogflow preceded and will
survive.
outlast,
Yeah.
yeah, um, custom actions on Assistant. Okay.
Yes. And hopefully that was at least relatively clear, or at least as clear as anything gets when you're talking about Google.
That's true.
So I guess how much have you worked with Dialogflow? I mean, you worked with it a little bit when it ties into Jovo, when you were doing some of the stuff when you were building stuff
Yeah.
for actions on Google.
Yeah, and that's really the context that I've used it in. It's Jovo version 2 and 3. That was that at that point. That was Dialogflow was the only way to create custom actions, and I was really trying to figure out ways that I could do the same skill or action and deploy it on multiple platforms. And so I did like that approach. And then, as Action Builder came out, Jovo migrated to using Action Builder and
Oh,
kind of dropped support for Dialogflow. So not a lot of experience actually. So it'd be kind of interesting to see what it can do outside of the context of how I used it.
one of the really neat things about Dialogflow as an NLP, natural language processing system, and I think most of our conversation we're going to be focusing on, what does this mean for developers?
Yeah.
This tool is in a lot of ways, these tools are design tools, but there are important developer elements to them, which I think we'll be hitting on. One of the really interesting things about the original Dialogflow, and this is the version of Dialogflow that's now called Dialogflow Essentials or Dialogflow ES. is that it had kind of a rudimentary concept of a state machine that was part of it.
Mhm.
So while it, in the same way for Alexa, you would enter in a bunch of phrases and indicate what intent that would trigger for each of those phrases. You could also say things like, this intent is only triggered in this state. And as part of Dialogflow, you can say, when this intent is triggered, when you leave it, set this state and set this state for this many turns. So, it was kind of useful to have a concept of here's what state we're in, but also we've got things that could be triggered outside of the state. And even so, your internal state would count down. You had a limited number of times that would be in effect.
And you could use that for like fallback stuff or what?
So what this was really useful for, or what the notion of state was useful for, is twofold. One is this would be where you can store specific state relevant information. So for example, Voodoo Drive, one of the things that I do with it is you can have it prompt you for fields to ask. And when you're doing so, it needs to maintain a little bit of state about which field you're currently in, and just the fact that you're in this loop to begin with, because when you are, the inputs that it gets need to be treated slightly differently. It knows that when you just say a number, that number is actually, addressing a particular field rather than something else. Or if you say repeat that, it needs to repeat things a little bit differently so that it knows it's not taking that as a value. It needs to tell you what you just did. So there are certain places when you're in different states as a programmer. And here's a case where the NLU is kind of helping you along with that. Again, another example with Voodoo Drive is, once you open a spreadsheet, it now needs to know that you can close the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Closing it there is very different than if you haven't opened one and you ask it to close something. Are you quitting? What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's a different behavior that you may want. And that can be useful to encode directly as part of the natural language processing system. So that's a really, really helpful notion about it.
Okay.
The things about Dialogflow ES that are kind of the crucial pieces are the ones that we're probably familiar with if we've done development on Alexa, or, if we've done other NLU processing. So we have intents. Intents are pretty common amongst all of these things. Intents also have some additional stuff that can go with it. So, while intents do have parameters, which we might call slots sometimes, or whatever.
Yep.
And they have training phrases. There's also additional values that can be part of it. So for example, they also have a notion of what they call an action, which is really just a field that you can fill in as you're creating the intent to kind of give it a bigger picture. So you can have multiple intents, each with the same action. And you can react based on the action rather than an intent name.
Okay.
You can set built-in responses. So if you don't need to call a webhook for whatever reason, you've got responses that will go back, and it will pick one of the responses that makes the most sense. For the slots that are filling in, you can give it prompts to ask for prompts. You can set whether a parameter is required or not, and it will prompt for it before the intent gets fulfilled. So that's, a pretty common notion of intents. Parameters have entity types, just like they do everywhere else. This notion of state that I was talking about is what they refer to as a context.
Okay.
So you can set what contexts are required to be there in order for the intent to be triggered, and what context gets set when the intent has been triggered. And by default, that context will contain all the parameters that you've set in that intent. And, then you can set whether it's going to be fulfilled with a webhook or not. And that webhook fulfillment is, again, pretty much what we're used to. There's no big
Yeah.
surprises there.
So I've got a question about the webhook. So you tied the webhook to, is that at an intent? How does that how does that get associated in is it a single webhook that all the intents hook up to, or can you have multiple different endpoints?
That's a great question. Under ES, you can only have one webhook that is set for the entire project.
Okay.
And what your webhook then needs to do is, when it gets it, it needs to examine either what the intent name was or what the action name is, or make some other determination about what it's received to figure out what function to call or how to handle it. That actually changes when we talk about CX, but we'll talk about CX in a second. The other big notion about Dialogflow ES, and this also, this is something that we also kind of touched on, is that they have a lot of what they refer to as integrations. So if you think of webhooks as being on one side, that your intent can send stuff to a webhook, the integrations are what will send stuff to Dialogflow and get the responses from Dialogflow. So the Google Assistant was an integration.
Okay.
Facebook Messenger is an integration. Dialogflow provides its own messenger, which is an integration. And there's an API there. So if you wrote something else, you've now written an integration with Dialogflow just by the nature of using their API.
So just so you know, so other things like Microsoft would call those channels. You might refer to them as platforms. So they're different, but it's the kind of the core is the same. The NLU processing is the same, and then you can host that with inputs from lots of different providers.
Right. Exactly. And one of the interesting things to note is that on some level, you could just use Dialogflow to detect intents. Which intent just got fired, and ignore responses completely if your integration handles all of that for you. So if you're writing something with Jovo or with Raza, and it just needs an NLU, it could use Dialogflow as that NLU and do all of the response processing itself.
Right.
That's certainly a totally valid way to use it. So that's kind of the old Dialogflow. The new Dialogflow takes it and revamps it in a lot of ways. It uses many concepts that seem similar on the surface and totally change a bunch of other things. And
so
this is known
adds
as
confusion to the mix.
Oh yeah, because there's why do things the simple way? So this is known as Dialogflow CX. And in a lot of ways, Dialogflow CX kind of said, increasingly, design of these conversational systems needs a designer. It needs a designer that is going to be using a visual agent. And you need a better way to control flow of the conversation. So if you think about the visual elements that VoiceFlow gives, for example, and one of these days we need to get we need to get something.
Oh, we definitely do.
Yeah. They kind of took some of those ideas and brought them into Dialogflow itself.
Okay.
So rather than having things that are focused on intents and slot filling in those intents, it instead says we have this notion of a page. And at any given moment, you will be on a particular page. And a page may have a form to fill in. We understand that notion. I mean, that sounds a lot like slots to fill in, and that's exactly what it is.
Well, and it even sounds like on HTML, I go to this
Right,
page that has a form to fill out, and I submit that form, and I get the next step in my order process, and I get the
right. And when you submit that form, it sends it to a web server somewhere, like via a handler, which is still in
oh,
place. The notion of a handler is similar, but a little bit amped up. So a handler usually is something like a webhook, but doesn't have to be.
okay,
Um, the webhooks are a little more advanced. You can now have more than one webhook defined for the project, and your handler needs to specify which one it will use.
all right,
Um, what's sent to the webhook includes things like the name of the handler that you've given it, along with parameters and other bits of state where you're in. But you can also have intents. So if you're on a page, you can say, if this other intent gets triggered, here's what you need to do instead. So it may be that triggering an intent will take you to a different page. It just transitions you to another node.
yeah,
Um, it may be that that intent in transitioning to another node carries with it some parameter information, which will start to fill out the form that's on this new page. It may just be that it's now going to a help for that specific page. And you can at some point say, okay, I'm done, and go back to the page and resume the conversation where you were.
okay.
So it has Jovo, if I remember correctly, had a notion of what was it's now totally escaping me what it was called, the context frame that they had, and there was a default frame that it might
Oh, like a global handler or
global
a
handler, that
global
was the word that I was
component?
looking.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
you have that sort of thing where you define possibly global intents that
okay.
will work anywhere. Um, so these are all kind of interesting notions, but they all kind of rely on this notion of flowing from page to page to page.
Okay.
And even as some of these flows, you've got subflows. So it might have a notion of, when you're moving from one segment to another, this might itself have a bunch of subflows in it that can take you to different kinds of pages. But when they're all done and they've collected all the information, it goes to yet another node. Beyond that, though, concepts are pretty much the same. You still have entity types that apply to different slots. You still have a webhook, but it's a little bit of an amped up webhook. The intents that are there are still similar to the intents that we're used to on most other systems, just that you're not relying on them as much in most cases.
Yeah.
But again, you still have a notion that some intents can be triggered on a particular page, and you can't trigger them on other pages. So it can behave different, or when it does get triggered, it behaves differently in different pages. Other than that, things are pretty much what we'd be used to in a lot of ways.
So do they have integrations, the same concept of integrations, or is there a different purpose? Why, I don't know if you can answer the question of why did they create CX?
But
Um,
you have two questions there. So the
yeah,
first is, yes, they also have integrations. Fundamentally, the integrations work the same way.
okay.
They've provided fewer default integrations, though. So they had originally, for ES, there were integrations with Facebook. I'm pretty sure Slack was a built-in one. There were integrations with several text and messaging systems. For CX, they've mostly focused on telephony. So while there are some provided integrations for several telephony providers, including an example telephony provider from Google, there are fewer other integrations by default. And again, there's an API that's still there. You can still use it. You can still build an integration if one makes sense for you. But it's not, they are not providing as many of them by default, which kind of leads into, well, why did they do this?
Yeah.
I think it's twofold. One is, I think they realized that more and more of the conversations that customers were trying to use were very flow-based conversations. And while you can do that with ES, what you tend to get are these contexts that are nested in these other contexts that are nested in these other contexts. So you get kind of this cascading look of intents, which gets really difficult to manage really quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas something that is more flow-based and certainly more visual in designing it makes it easier to design and build and manage.
Right.
So I think that's why they moved in that direction. And I think also their big focus is more towards telephony. You know, a lot of the products that are in Google Cloud surrounding Dialogflow are call center based products.
Okay.
So it's, you know, how does this tie into their call center AI system, and how do you build something for cloud for your call center? And to be honest, I think the pricing of CX also reflects that as well. It's priced quite a bit higher than ES is. And I think that reflects the fact that their target customers are building call centers. So saving money at a call center, even at that price, is a good thing, and what their clients are trying to do.
Yeah, and it could be like one of those ways of Google trying to figure out a way to monetize this. How is this going to be a product as opposed to, you know, something that's fun?
Yes.
And so I can see where they're focusing kind of, you know, our target audience here is the call center as opposed to, you know, directly to consumers, whether it be, businesses creating a chat bot or, you know, Facebook Messenger bot or something like that.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that's clearly aiming for much more complex bots or much more complex systems. You know, it's not looking to handle a couple of chat commands, you know, like we've talked about last week. It's really aiming for larger, more complex conversations with users, clients, and making sure that you can address their needs as part of that complicated conversation. And I think that's also reflected in some of the other supporting things that go with it. So it's built to work with teams a little bit better than ES was, for example. Okay. It's got better support for saving the current state to GitHub, for example, and being able to export and import it from GitHub so you can version it. It's got better support for versioning and those sorts of things. So it's more aimed at supporting teams that need to support large, complicated conversational systems rather than, you know, a designer developer or a designer and a developer working together to create a simple chat system.
So we kind of got a flavor for Dialogflow and its evolution over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's kind of see why that evolution happened. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, you know, it's the sort of thing where it's a really powerful tool, and both flavors of it are pretty powerful. And I think people who have not been used to that kind of power might see a need for it in some cases. Yeah. But it's certainly not, you know, it is the right tool at the right time, not the right tool for everything. You know, but okay. I want to make sure that you know, developers are aware that it's out there and that it can be used, and it's got some good power to it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
No,
well,
as always,
yeah. if we'd like to know what your experience is using Dialogflow and various flavors of it, or kind of what you're using instead. You can contact us lots of different ways. You can contact us on Twitter or LinkedIn or elsewhere, and kind of let us know how things are going.
And whatever you reply, we'll pick it up another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Alan.
Take care, Mark. Have a great week.
You too. Thank you.